the best response you can have to a payoff in a thriller is someone goes, "Oh, right, I forgot. Of course, I should have."
On Story offers a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers, creators, and filmmakers. All of our content is recorded live at Austin Film Festival and our year-round events. To view previous episodes, visit onstory.tv. On Story is brought to you in part by the Alice Clayburgh Reynolds Foundation, a Texas family providing innovative funding since 1979. From Austin Film Festival, this is On Story, a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers, creators, and filmmakers. This week's On Story, the creator of Godless and the writer behind Logan, Scott Frank, and legendary writer-director Walter Hill.
I always thought that the biggest thing about the Western, it isn't very much remarked upon, but you're really wandering around in the world of the Old Testament, much more than you are, I think, wandering around in American history. The real West wasn't very much like Westerns. There were elements of it, but when you really research it, it was very different than our movie concept.
In this episode, Scott Frank and Walter Hill dissect the power behind Westerns and the international films they inspired and were inspired from.
So can you talk about, like you said that Westerns, that's all you wanted to do was make a Western. So can you talk about why? You know, what struck you about the genre, that it was the vehicle for your storytelling?
I am uniquely qualified to be here today because I've not only made Westerns, but I was raised as a Presbyterian, so I'm, which, when I was young, there was the definition, it was the Republican Party at prayer, was the definition of Presbyterian. They were the movies I liked best when I was a kid. As I grew to appreciate film, I became increasingly fascinated with them. And also, I like the kind of people that made Westerns. I like to be around them. So I drifted into it. I think it was my fourth film when I got to make the first one, and felt right at home, and been lucky enough to make a few since.
Well, what's interesting to me about the genre of Westerns, even from an early stage, was that this whole concept of the anti-hero hero, you know, that's now the mainstay of cable television, that it's okay to be Tony Soprano.
They actually got it from Japanese films. They took, Leone's first film is a carbon copy of Kurosawa's Yojimbo.
Get 3 coffins ready.
Huh?
The idea of the anti-heroic lout bum but wondrous physical protagonist is a direct lift out of Japanese films.
And Unforgiven, like, that's a newer one, obviously, but it, is a great example. I mean, he was not a good guy, and so many of them were not good guys.
Unforgiven's an interesting movie to look at because
what's amazing about that movie, and you have an anti-hero, you have a guy who is trying to be a good guy. When you meet him, he's struggling, and he's, for all intents and purposes, you see no sign of what he was once before. And in order to do what needs to be done, he has to be the worst part of himself, I guess would be how I would describe it. And that's great storytelling. People love that. You're waiting for him to become that bad guy that you've heard about, because you haven't seen it. You've seen him, he's sick, he's coughing, he's getting beat up. And it also plays with all these notions of the West. It has two things. One, when somebody gets shot, it hurts, and there's somebody dying. That whole sequence when they're trying to kill the kid, the one of the guys, and they go against all the stuff when people are just, you know, dispatched in old school Westerns. And the other thing that I loved about it was the anecdotal storytelling, that long scene in the jail cell where Gene Hackman is telling the story about how to survive a gunfight, and it's like its own little movie. And it's completely upending all the myths or cliches of Westerns all the way through it. And that's part of the fun of it, aside from just the visceral feeling of the bad guys getting theirs.
Well, now, the duck of death is as good as dead. Because Corky does it right. Aim's real careful. No hurry. And BAM! The Walker Colt blew up in his hand, which was a failing common to that model. You see, the old Corky had two guns instead of just a big. He would have been there right to the end to defend himself.
The Searchers has been listed always as one of the top Westerns on everybody's list of, you know, critically greatest films. What is it that you think is about that film that transcends this much time, you know?
I'm going to say something awful, so forgive me. I'm sorry. I don't love John Wayne movies in general, and The Searchers, for me, I understand why it is what it is, but I'm not particularly moved by that one for whatever. I understand the power of the movie and the racism, and there are great moments in it, great little moments like when she takes his coat and rubs his coat, and you know in that little moment she loves him, Ethan, when he comes back, and the fact that there aren't a lot of close-ups, and we could talk about all the stuff that people have already talked about that are great, but I watch it and I have to really work to stay invested in The Searchers for whatever reason. I don't know how to answer that question. Walter probably does.
Yeah, Walter.
Walter probably loves
We're looking to you, man.
Walter actually has mixed feelings about The Searchers. I obviously like it. I do like John Wayne movies, some of them, I mean a lot of them. I think he was a remarkable actor and of great power and great significance, obviously. The Searchers, I've always felt was a movie that those people who didn't appreciate the full powers of John Ford always invested in The Searchers ideas that were maybe beyond what's actually in the movie. Nobody has ever really totally satisfactorily worked out what the hell The Searchers is trying to say. There are Lindsay Anderson, who was a friend of mine and a great filmmaker, and wrote a book about, I think the best book really about a filmmaker is Lindsay's book on John Ford. And Lindsay didn't like The Searchers at all. I mean, he felt very strongly that it was Ford operating unsurely on material that had no coherence. Yes, it has fabulous scenes in it, and anybody not moved by the end, just the imagery and the music and the geography, the landscape, is incapable of having feelings about motion pictures. But at the same time, that doesn't make a coherent drama, and I don't think it really stands up as a coherent drama. There are people, and we're kind of being asked to be critics here. We're not usually that, but there are people who think it's the greatest American film, and they are serious critics, and they see it as very much a of an American story that transcends racism. That's the whole point, is that where Ethan gets to is he gets beyond his prejudices, and that Jean-Luc Godard said, you know, the great shot where you think John Wayne's going to kill Natalie Wood, and then he lifts her up over his head, and you know that this is going to be a happy ending, that he's accepted what happened to her, and he's going to move past his own prejudices. Is an absolutely Greek mythopoetic moment. I think I was about 11 or 12 when I saw Shane, and I thought it was absolutely the best film that I'd ever seen. And it's still awfully good. It's a deceptively simple story. They wouldn't have gotten away with it had they not really told it through the eyes of the child. Alan Ladd's performance is so otherworldly. It's like he's a visitor from another planet or something, that gives the movie a kind of poetry and drama that I think few other actors, I don't know if any other actor could actually have done. He was peculiarly qualified for that drama. George Stevens shot it beautifully. It's both socially realistic in a certain way and mythopoetic in a grand way simultaneously, which is not an easy juggling act. It's just a good, and the photography was, at its time, utterly spectacular, the Grand Tetons and all that. It is a marvelous film, but I don't think it's the greatest Western, but I think it's awfully good. And the end of the movie, where Ladd tells Brandon DeWilde to grow up straight and strong, I think is still very moving.
You're hurt.
I'm all right, Joey. You go home to your mother and your father and grow up to be strong and straight. Joey, take care of them. Both of them.
Yes, Shane.
The other thing about Shane, which influenced Godless a lot, there's this great father-son relationship, two fathers, you know, and this whole idea of what masculinity is and what fighting is and when to use force and all those things that fathers in those days taught sons, and also there's tension between the wife and Shane, and all those things are at work. So there's really a lot of melodrama in the best sense of that word going on in the movie, and that part, that's also as satisfying as the bad guys getting it. And but the father-son stuff was huge for me, and the father trying to, you know, hold the respect of his son and the respect of his wife is really powerful in that movie, and had a huge influence. When I was writing Godless, I have to admit, my mandate for myself was to embrace every single Western cliche I could think of, to just not try and run from them. The gunfight, the two guys facing each other, breaking horses, the train robbery, you know, all the stuff, and to kind of have those in there, to do it all, but do it somehow differently, or put it in a different context if I could, you know, or in some other way.
It's a fearful thing to love what death can touch.
Where are all the men at?
Dead. Vaughn took them.
All of them. How has the town fared without any men around?
Someone's got to look after things around here.
A town full of ladies. Bang, bang. It's ripe fruit for the wicked. Bang, bang.
Frank Griffin's been looking for Roy Good.
He's going to kill anyone that Roy Good loves or cares about.
The good people of Creed let them walk their streets. Now they don't have no streets.
When he finds out who's living here,
God help you folks.
The hardest thing was dialogue, just making, I didn't want to have a lot of I reckon, you know, and so I didn't have an ear for it, and I wanted to kind of really think about it, and I didn't want to do what they did in Butch Cassidy, which is, you know, one of my all-time favorite movies, but they're speaking in a very modern sort of way. So I read a ton of Western novels. I think I read 30 of them, and I would only allow myself to read Western novels for a year or two, and I was able to sort of catch the way people spoke, and certainly able to steal a lot of stuff too. It was a really good. That's what I was more worried about more than anything else.
But what is it about that kind of those accoutrements of character, you know, that become so attractive? Like what those elements? How do they make your? And they did in Godless. Your characters are some of them do feel bigger than life and mythical, you know?
There's so many things that make them interesting. I don't know if you can pick one thing. I think it's just a whole other world that people got used to, the way they do crime stories, detective stories. It's just one of those things that suck you into being a part of. There is a little bit there, but for the grace of God go I when you're watching all of them. Mm-hmm. And the kind of spinning guns and all those things and the weapons and the horses. I think it's part of the fantasy. For me, I mean, I don't read too much into it other than because I just tell stories and I just think about what is fun and interesting to explore in the story more than anything else.
What was it about Geronimo that, I mean, the story that really hasn't been told a lot, that made you want to?
Well, Geronimo was, I always thought it was a misnomer. I mean, the title. Geronimo makes it sound like it's about Geronimo, which it's about the Geronimo War. It's the last time he broke off the reservation. And it's as much about the army that had to hunt him down as about Geronimo.
Have they taught you to lie, Gatewood?
I don't lie. But the truth is General Miles will hunt you for 50 years. He's already sent your families to Florida, which is far, far away. Look around. See how few warriors you have left.
If I kill White Eyes forever, I am still Geronimo, an Apache. Who are you, Gatewood?
Just a man, like you. And I want to go home. I want to see my family.
I just thought it was a good story that had not really been examined in a very serious way. There had been a number of movies where Geronimo was character or something. I think he was played by Chuck Connors and people like that. Yeah. So, you know, I thought it'd be good to do one where you had a serious actor who was Native American. I thought the time was right.
Why do you think the Italians became so obsessed with the genre for a while? I mean, it does seem particularly not Italian.
Well, the quick answer is money. They were very popular, and it afforded them a way to make lots of movies and with kind of guaranteed box office for a rather short period of time. I mean, the spaghetti Western really thrived between, 1963 and 1974 or something like that. And they're very special. I quite love them, but I don't think, in another way, I don't even think they're Westerns. They're really kind of operas that are based on Western movies. First place, they're not. Our Westerns originally were based on a misperception of life in the West, American West. They became stylized, and then the Italians did a stylization of a stylization, and and they weren't interested in any kind of social realism, I think, in a lot of ways. Leone, for instance, although a man of the left, politically, one of his rules were no Indians in the movies. He didn't want, because it raised issues that, in his films, it would raise issues that he didn't want to deal with. It was the purity of the gunfight and the code of honor of the bounty hunter versus whatever, the industrialist and the film, so.
No, I think that's exactly right. They were both, the stylization of a stylization is exactly what they were, and they were super operatic, and you were laughing at them sometimes. Sometimes it's just the bad dubbing that makes you laugh, but they're just a lot of fun, and you get into it, and don't underestimate the power of the music in those.
Well, yes, I was just about to say, and the music, the music was something entirely different for us. I'm obviously older than Scott. I was in my 20s when the great rise of the spaghetti Western, and the music was extraordinary, and it was both risible and compelling. And then finally, we grew to just totally admire it.
Frank?
Frank sent us.
It took a little conditioning for a lot of people. American film critics never caught up with it. And in fact, other than the Eastwood films and his personal popularity, the American audience was never really particularly responsive to the spaghetti Western. They were a European phenomena, world phenomena, but not particularly an American phenomenon. Once Upon a Time in the West was a complete commercial bust in America, and was one of the greatest hits in the history of the European cinema in Europe. So.
And the first 20 minutes of that movie, it's like, Eric Clapton's Layla. It's like great, and then the piano kicks in, and it's not so good anymore. But it's awesome, and I could watch the first bit of that forever and ever and ever. I mean, I just love it. Right through Henry Fonda's introduction and all of that. I mean, it's spectacular. It's everything. Even though it is a stylization of a stylization, everything about a Western that we love is in that first act of that movie. Henry Fonda in Once Upon a Time in the West, I was really struck by him. He was smiling. He was always smiling. It was a really interesting performance. And just reading about what he was thinking about, and he wasn't confident in doing it, and he's clean-shaven, which is spectacular in it. It's like shocking almost. And it was such a different, surprising way to go. And I think when you write anything, you're just trying to do something that's unexpected as much as you can.
You've been watching a conversation with Scott Frank and Walter Hill on Story. Story is part of a growing number of programs in Austin Film Festival's Story project, including the Story PBS series, now streaming online, the Story radio program and podcast in collaboration with Public Radio International, and the Story book series available on Amazon. To find out more about On Story and Austin Film Festival, visit onstory.tv or austinfilmfestival.com.
The best response you can have to a payoff in a thriller is someone goes, "Oh, right, I forgot. Of course, I should have."
On Story offers a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers, creators, and filmmakers. All of our content is recorded live at Austin Film Festival and our year-round events. To view previous episodes, visit onstory.tv.